Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Dave, and in this episode, we're going to be doing something slightly different. We're going to be talking about mental health, or at least my mental health. I'm not a medical professional in mental health, so take everything I say here with a pinch of salt. This is purely anecdotal, really, and it's quite personal. So please use your discretion in watching this, and if that's something that you might find problematic, then stop it. It will be here whenever you want to come back to it if you want to. So let's talk about my mental health and LARP, or RP in general, I should say. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for since I was in my early 20s, maybe earlier than that, and I've been doing LARP for the last couple of years. In fact, when my first event, I set up the podcast, which with a couple of friends of mine, and we've been kind of chronicling our journey along the LARP road. This episode feels like a long time coming because it's something I've thought about. We've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but I feel like I'm in a point in my life now where I kind of want to open up to it, and it might be quite personal, and I feel pretty exposed talking about it, but hopefully if one or two people get something out of this video, then it's worthwhile. So, okay, so let's talk about it. So RP is quite interesting because I found it tends to mirror an awful lot of my own personality when I'm doing it. So certain characters that I have created in D&D and in LARP have often come back to be quite relevant to personal situation or my anxieties or other things like that. I find that quite interesting. It's not that I necessarily realized it at the time. It's more retrospectively looking back, I realized that maybe a character or characters were processing some emotional need that I had in my life, and I've always found that quite interesting. The reason why I'm talking about it now is because of the nature of COVID and my own personal situation. At the start of this year, I had some bad things happen in my personal life I won't go into now, but it was the end of something very important to me. And then we went straight into lockdown. So the problems I had before COVID had always been there, but I wasn't fully aware of them. And I'll go into some detail on what they are. Now, people that have long-time listeners to the podcast might be surprised or not surprised by that I have a lack of self-confidence and opinion of myself, basically, which can be quite odd for someone that's quite talkative and does a podcast and do all those sorts of things. For some people to see me in that way, but that's kind of the way it is, which is kind of another reason why I wanted to talk about this, because I think we all have our own mental health journeys that we're going on. I think some of them are less obvious than others. That's not to say they are severe or less severe, but yeah, let me move on basically before I get bogged down. So for me, making the podcast was something that I was both very excited about and very scared about. So, and this comes down to this lack of self-confidence or self-image, right? Where I just thought that people would just hate us, find it ridiculous. They would ridicule us. And this was kind of at this point of like where I started to become aware of my internal voice being quite negative and making everything seem bad. I'd always been aware of it being a thing, but especially over the start of this year, that really started to have big problems. Like I wouldn't be able to so for example, doing the podcast, making an episode, editing the episode and getting it out there, I ground to a halt. Like I couldn't do it. It was like I just thought whatever I was producing was terrible, that people weren't enjoying it, that it was it's all of the negative things you could possibly think about a project that you're working on. That was kind of how I felt about it. And this came from, let me backtrack a second. So basically, due to how I was feeling about things, I ended up doing CBT therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and I was very lucky in having the opportunity to do that. Not everybody does, financially or otherwise, so that's something that was good. But I've been on a kind of a 6-month journey going through that process, and I kind of at the point now where I just want to kind of just give some musings on what I've been thinking about, how I feel about myself going forward, and hopefully, like I said earlier, that I hope this, if this resonates with 1 or 2 people, then great. Like, it might not have, for many of you, switch off now, you might not get anything out of it, right? But I'm going to keep going. So I will relate this to RP and LARP at some point, by the way. I realized that an awful lot of the stuff that my internal voice was saying about myself might not be true. Lots of negative words like I was lazy, like I was, if you really got to know me, you wouldn't like the person underneath. What else? Just basically getting to the point where everything I did, I would retcon it afterwards or during to become a negative thought, which became quite, it stops me from doing the things I really enjoyed doing, which is making the podcast and other creative projects that I had on. And not completing those projects would just compound those problems by being, well, I must be lazy and useless because I'm not making the podcast because of the feelings that I'm having, and it ends up into a kind of a circle of like lack of confidence and inaction, which kind of end up kind of producing quite negative thoughts, really. So I started CBT therapy, and basically I'm not advertising to everyone that this might be a miracle cure for everyone, and it certainly hasn't been for me. I still have lots of stuff to work on, but it's certainly given me a change in view of myself and hopefully some tools to go forward with. So I'm just going to kind of talk about a few things to do with that and how that relates to RP. So there are a few things that kind of made me realize that maybe I was wobbling a lot more under the surface than I was on the outside. I think one of the big things was when there was a moment where people asked who wanted to be a sergeant for a battle or a second, and I completely froze and hesitated. And it was a complete fear-driven response. Like, I couldn't speak, I couldn't do the action that I wanted to do, and I was held back by my own insecurities. But on the flip side of that, there have been times at LARP where I've surprised myself by taking a plunge and doing the thing and saying yes and really dedicating to it. And then usually when that happens, I've had wonderful experiences that have been really reinforced by my friends and other people I went to LARP with as being good things and worthwhile and fun, right? But that negative voice comes in again and kind of tells me that, even the good stuff is bad, right? And I think this comes down to a few things that I've kind of learned over this process, which is, well, at least I'm going to be very specific for me. This might affect you. If it does, if it resonates, good. If it doesn't, that's fine. But I'm just going to talk anecdotally about myself and how I understand it to be. So my understanding of how my brain works is that during my life, I was given certain messages or feedback to give a description of who I am as a person, right? So when I grew up, I had very bad acne. I was dyslexic. I had big glasses on, and I was very nerdy. And I think, a lot of different factors involved. But basically, I had some pretty nasty bullying when I was growing up. I was very bad academically. And I really struggled through those teenage years, like I really did. And I got through them, and I really didn't process all the thoughts that I was going through my head at the time. I feel like that those experiences imprinted my self-view on myself. Like now I'm 37 years old, okay? Like I'm no longer the kid I was when I was 14, right, or 15. But that messaging and that imprinting has lasted to today, right? And I feel like it's part of like a defense mechanism for your brain, basically. And I think a good analogy would be, say if we're way back in the day and it's prehistoric time and I'm walking along and I step on a stick and it goes crack, okay, and it's a stick. And I walk on, and there's another stick, and I step on it, and it goes crack, and it's a stick, right? And I step on another stick, and it turns out to be a snake. That snake then bites me, and then I'm sick for a few days. So what my brain does is it says, okay, well, I should be scared of sticks, right? Because if I step on the wrong stick, it could be a snake, and I could end up ill, right? So that mechanism on the brain is actually a defense mechanism, and it's trying to keep me safe. Unfortunately, those thought processes aren't necessarily interested in whether you're happy or not. They just want to keep you safe. I think that's a good way of kind of encapsulating maybe how I feel about how I got to the point, because my life's pretty good. Like on a outside level, I have good friends around me, a very supportive family. You know, I have a job that isn't the best job in the world, but I enjoy doing it, and I have all the things I need. There are very few things in my life that are actual, like, real problems, you know, but yet I cannot help by making the worst out of it. And I think the problem is that negative voice that I've had inside my head is also me, right? So it knows everything I know. It can make everything that I know into a negative by using the information that I already know, which makes this sort of thing extremely challenging to try and sift through. It can also feel very safe being in that negative space, because that's where you're safe, by closing yourself off from the world and not putting yourself out there and really living the fullest life you can, because it's safer, right? So yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot to talk about. But so why is this relevant to LARP and RP in general? Well, I think it has to do with something that I've seen benefits of going to LARP. And I'll go through some of my thoughts about why I think LARP and RP is really important. As I said before, I think that my characters have often represented facets of myself, or parts of myself that I want to be, or and the way I think that works is, I think LARP and RP, just RP I should say, gives you distance, and it gives context to it. So you have the freedom to offset some of those thoughts and feelings away from you enough that you can potentially start working through them in an environment like Empire or like other LARPs, where you can start to increase your confidence. Say if you're at school and or another time in your life, and you stood up and you had to read something out in front of a class, and there's some nasty kids at the back of the class and they're laughing at you. For the analogy that I was using earlier, that would just be, well, if I stand up and I talk in public, there are snakes and they will hurt me and I will feel bad, so I should avoid speaking publicly. Now, that doesn't represent anything to do with your ability to talk or other people's ability to enjoy what you're saying or be informed by what that you're saying. I think that's kind of why I've seen so many people I know at LARP developing confidence, develop their skills, and generally find new ways to explore themselves and their interactions with other people. And I found it absolutely fantastic, basically, like in a lot of ways. Now, going through making the podcast, we've had some really nice people talking to us, very nice compliments and all that stuff. And I think it's very interesting that I could take a lot of those and just turn them into something negative, which is such a shame, because it's like people seem very genuine about their affection towards what we're doing. And I hope in the future that I'm going to learn skills to maybe take those on board and feel a lot more confidence in what we're doing and how we're making it. I feel like that's already happening now with me making videos or audio like this. I'll tell you a story, basically, to finish up with, which is we've been running a D&D campaign with Ian, who is also one of the founding members of the podcast. He's DMing it, and my character is a character called Theodore Chadwick Hurst. My friends call me Teddy. And he's a paladin. For those that don't know, a paladin is someone that's kind of almost like a religious type, very zealous. it's very good versus evil. Things are very black and white for them. But poor Teddy, he is the fourth brother of a very, very famous family. So his dad was a great hero. His three older brothers are all heroes in their own right, who are all renowned around the world and have songs sung about them. But young Teddy was kind of the runt of the litter at 6'4" or whatever, and he used to get bullied endlessly by his brothers. And after a particularly rough night of roughhousing, he decided that he was gonna set off and make a name for himself out in the world. And that's basically where we started. But it was 2 years after he'd left, and he'd achieved nothing in that time. And it's funny how many of those character notes, not the situation, but many of the kind of internal thoughts maybe of that character are kind of resonated with me, right? Like the sense that you're not good enough, or that you're not worthy of something, i.e. in this case a family name, is quite interesting when I actually started to break it down. Now, Teddy's gone through a bit of a journey in the time that he's been adventuring. He's defeated many foes and been made moral choices and backed it up. And I've always had this idea that Teddy going into battle is terrified, right? He's very, very scared, but he believes in what he's doing so much that he tries to shrug off his own insecurities and do the right thing. So he has this moral blanket to kind of hide some of those things. Now, and last night, in fact, we got to a point where Teddy came face to face with Abraxas, who's a demon lord, or sometimes known as the Unfathomable, right? Like the absolute polar opposite of what Teddy is and what he stands for. And Abraxas and him had a conversation, and in that conversation, Abraxas said that your fear will get the better of you. You will never live up to your family name, and that you will fail. And I've always interesting how Teddy, it's me obviously, but how I chose Teddy to respond to that, which was that he may well fail, right? Like, but that's not what's important about it. The important part of it is the fact Teddy's trying, and he's doing his best to try and be a force of good in the world. So even if he does fail and dies in a ditch somewhere or some cave somewhere, his life is still worthwhile because of the actions he's taking. Even if he doesn't get everything he wants and the world isn't perfect by the time he leaves it, he's still trying very hard to make it a better place. And I felt that really resonated with me at the time, and kind of inspired me to make this video. Now, I understand that many people's mental health is very different, but I think there's a lot of universal factors with all of us, and I think if we really start to break down and have honest conversations with each other, we can often find common ground in our insecurities and worries and fears. And I wonder, maybe this as a starting point for maybe someone to start to look at their life and see that maybe they're not showing themselves enough care and love and affection, and closing off the world around them from opportunities that they, in all rights, should be able to enjoy, right? Like, yeah. I just feel like there are lots of us out there, especially at this time, and times are hard for a lot of people, where those negative voices can start to rule the roost. Another good analogy I like is thinking about yourself as a bus driver. So you're driving a bus and you're trying to get from A to B, right? And as along the route, the door opens and different parts of your personality come onto the bus, right? So you have your anxiety gets on the bus, and your anxiety says, take a left here. We don't want to go down that street. It's scary down there. So just take a left, go, and then we'll go right, and we'll go left again, then we'll go right. And you never quite end up in the destination you wanted to because of this anxious person standing behind you, whispering in your ear, telling you what to do with it. So I think in future, and I may fail a lot of times, and it's certainly a journey that I've only just begun, but in future I'd like the idea that maybe I would be able to tell that anxious voice that I appreciate their advice, and I know they're trying to help, but I would quite like to get to my destination, whatever that might be. And I hope you do too. Again, I'm not a mental health expert. This is only my experiences of what I've been going through and kind of what I've been learning over the last few months. And I may have misrepresented what I said and done it in a bad way or whatever, and I apologize for that if I have. But this is just one man's attempt at trying to be honest and transparent and maybe help someone else that's also struggling. So if you are, I highly advise that you try and talk to your friends about it, maybe go and see your GP about it. If you have the opportunity to go privately, then do, because the waiting lists for the NHS are long. But no, just don't give up on yourself. We'll all work around stuff next year when we get to LARP again, hopefully, and I look forward to meeting all of you and maybe having a conversation about maybe how you've started to view yourself and maybe make some positive changes. That would be the best. So, but it's okay to not be perfect every single day, right? But yeah, it's a balance. So anyway, I'm waffling on. If you have any thoughts, please let me know. You can comment or you can message me, like if you want to talk about anything. Bear in mind, I probably will end up saying if it is very bad that you should probably go and talk to someone. But for what it's worth, there it is. So thank you. I hope you're doing well. More episodes of the podcast coming out soon. I should have talked about imposter syndrome with the podcast and all of that stuff. But I think we'll save that for another day. But I just wanted to say like a heartfelt thanks to Ian and Bungle, the guys I do the podcast with, are very generous patrons who are continuing to support the podcast despite knowing that there probably won't be any LARP content for a while. And just to be like, thank you to everyone that's listening and being involved. Like, it's really been a source of pride for me going through this process as clear evidence that maybe I'm not as bad as my brain tells me I am sometimes. We've had some wonderful guests. We've now got actors who are helping out doing the intros and outros. Delia helped out with music, for God's sake. It's just been a wonderful journey, and it's more like if you were listening to the podcast, and you just thought that we were just kicking ass the entire time and felt great about it. Just let you know that isn't the case, and we all have our up and downs and strifes. So, yeah, cool. Well, I don't know whether I've fully articulated what I wanted to say, but hopefully you've at least got the vibe of it. Thanks again for making it to the end, however long this is, and have a great day, and I'll hopefully speak to you all very, very soon. Much love. Bye-bye.